Sometimes in my job, you get the chance to meet a boyhood hero. Now for some, this could be a football legend or a rock star. For me, it's someone quite different, and someone I've been waiting 25 years to meet.
This might be hard to imagine, but I was once a floppy-haired 16-year-old hiding behind his fringe and dreaming of unlocking the secrets of the universe. And I nagged my parents one particular Christmas to get me the big science book that year. This is it, the actual Christmas present from 1988, a copy of Breve História by Professor Stephen Hawking.
Since that book was published, Hawking has become not just the world's most famous scientist, but a full-on pop culture icon.
Don't like it.
Far beyond the world of physics, people know his name, and possibly even more famously, his voice.
What is a black hole?
In 1963, doctors told him his motor neuron disease would give him 2 years to live. More than 50 years later, he continues to defy that diagnosis. He communicates using a voice synthesizer and the muscles in his face. His is the ultimate story of the triumph of the human spirit. So of course I want to meet Stephen Hawking, but I also want to spend time with the man behind the bright lights and the equations. I want to meet the team of people that look after Stephen, his friends, his colleagues, and maybe even the actor Eddie Redmayne, who won an Oscar for portraying him.
His face is perhaps the most charismatic face I've ever seen.
I'll also be meeting his children, who rarely talk publicly about their father.
I think there's a bit of the old razzmatazz about him. I think he actually secretly loves show business.
Who is this man, the genius, the husband, the father? With a story so incredible that even Hollywood wanted to tell it.
He's in many ways the most unusual hero and star this country's ever produced. We're going to meet Professor Stephen Hawking.
I'm meeting Stephen in a central London hotel today, a very special day. It's the premiere of the film about his life, The Theory of Everything. As I arrive at Stephen's hotel suite, I'm a little nervous, not least because I'm not sure how easy it is to have a conversation with him.
Hello. Hi, how are you? How are you? A pleasure to meet you as well. Hi, how are you? How are you?
Hi.
Professor Hawking, it's a pleasure to see you. How are you? Lovely to see you, by the way.
I've only just opened my mouth and already I've misjudged this. Stephen speaks by spelling out his responses at an average of 1 word per minute, so I could be left here on one knee for some time. Sensing my awkwardness, Stephen's housekeeper Pat generously provides me with a chair.
Ah, thank you very much. You're very kind.
And while Stephen composes his answer, it's hard not to babble.
And it's very difficult not to talk like an idiot in front of you. Because you're going, oh, I must fill this gap. I don't know how to be patient here. I must keep talking. And you realise the limits of your own small talk very quickly.
I have no small talk. Talking is such an effort.
It's a fair point.
Quickly, though, you learn the gear change from small talk to patience, and the conversation can start.
By the way, how should I address you? Professor Hawking, or how formal would you like me to be?
The tea lady calls me Stephen. That's good enough.
So, Stephen it is.
Do you want to ask your questions?
Yes, if I could. I suppose the first question would obviously be, how does it feel to have a film made of your life?
I was rather surprised that a major film company should want to make a film about me. At first, I was worried because it was based on a book by my ex-wife, Jane, but I was reassured when I read the script, and even more when I saw a first cut of the film. It was surprisingly honest about our marriage and my fight with ALS, or motor neuron disease. The one regret I have is that it doesn't contain more physics, but I suppose that was inevitable in the film for a general audience.
Were you happy to see Eddie Redmayne's version of you on screen?
I thought Eddie Redmayne portrayed me very well. He spent time with ALS sufferers so he could be authentic. At times, I thought he was me. It is perhaps the closest I will come to time travel.
It would be a privilege for us to spend some time with you this evening as you're getting ready for this event.
It will be a pleasure.
Good afternoon.
Hello,
how are you? Nice to meet you.
And now here's something I wasn't expecting. Stephen has a stylist to help him get ready for tonight's big occasion.
Sorry, you're the...
I'm William Gilchrist,
You're the
stylist.
stylist, fantastic. Lovely.
William and Stephen's personal assistant, Gina Lee York, have brought his red carpet outfit.
Stephen, if you remember, we had the double-breasted cardigan.
William might be a professional stylist, but here he's working to Stephen's brief.
And then scarf-wise, you had mentioned about a solid colour.
So we have the polka dot. The cashmere.
Keeping it elegant, keeping it simple.
The second scarf. I like plain.
Okay. Fabulous, you're all set?
Thank you.
Good stuff.
All the preparations made, the team head out to the movie premiere. An entourage of 5 people will be looking after Stephen for the big night tonight. And while he's been getting ready, so has Leicester Square. The stars of the film and assorted special guests have gathered for the fans and for the paparazzi cameras alike. It's the big opportunity for the film stars Eddie Redmayne and Felicity Jones to promote the film. Although frankly, anyone turning up with a vaguely famous face gets a camera stuck up their nose, including me. But the real star of the premiere is just arriving.
Ladies and gentlemen, the man whose life the theory of everything is based on. Please welcome to Leicester Square, Professor Stephen Hawking.
And so this is the glitz and glamour of a Leicester Square movie premiere. Light bulbs going off, music loudly playing. This is about the life story of a theoretical physicist. People don't make movies about theoretical physicists. To solve that riddle, we should probably get out of here. We should maybe go to Cambridge, meet Stephen Hawking and his family where they live, see where he works, and find out who he really is.
Cambridge is where Stephen has spent most of his life. Although he began his studies at Oxford, he came here to do his graduate work. It's where he made a name for himself in the academic world. It's also where he wrote his book, A Brief History of Time, and where he raised his family. It's where he still lives with his support team.
He's the longest living man ever with ALS or motor neuron disease, and that requires a large team around him to help him survive, essentially. It's an unusual lifestyle on many, many levels, but there's an enormous man at the heart of it, and that's the man we're going to see again here in his home. Hey, how are you, Pat? Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Good to be here.
Hello.
Before my visit today, I sent Stephen my questions in advance. He needs the time to prepare his answers because he has to spell out each word letter by letter using just the muscles in his face.
Stephen, thank you very much for inviting us into your home. I have a number of questions that you've been very kind enough to answer for me. My first question for you. You were diagnosed with motor neuron disease more than 50 years ago, and you were said at the time, the diagnosis said that you had 2 years to live. Essentially, the question is, how are you still here?
Obviously, I'm not a typical case, or I would have died half a century ago. I think my survival against the odds must have something to do with my commitment to science. I am damned if I'm going to die before I have unraveled more about the universe.
I would have that printed on badges and t-shirts. I'm damned if I'm going to die before I know how the universe works. Another question about the condition you have and how it's affected your life. Are you in pain?
Motor neuron disease doesn't cause pain, but sometimes I get uncomfortable because I can't adjust my position.
Of the things that this condition has taken from you, what do you miss the most?
I would like to be able to swim again.
To swim again, that's an interesting one to miss.
When my children were young, I missed not being able to play with them physically.
Stephen gives impressively honest answers even to the most direct questions.
Stephen, you have said that you support assisted suicide for people with terminal illnesses and that their family members should be able to assist without fear of prosecution. What condition would you have to be in for you to consider this option?
To keep someone alive against their wishes is the ultimate indignity. I would consider assisted suicide only if I were in great pain or felt I had nothing more to contribute, but was just a burden to those around me.
And I suppose maybe a more existential question than that, are you lonely?
At times I get very lonely because people are afraid to talk to me or don't wait for me to write a response. I am shy and tongue-tied at times. I find it difficult to talk to people I don't know.
Of course, not all of the great questions in life are about physics.
We talk a lot about the extraordinary life that you've had, but there is something very normal about your life as well. And by normal, I mean messy, like anyone else's life. I mean, 2 marriages, 3 children. Are there any hopes of discovering the laws that govern love? Or would that take the fun out of life?
Women are a mystery to me. That is the fun.
As they are to me and all other geeks as well.
That normal, messy human life of Stephen's has been compelling enough to be turned into a Hollywood blockbuster. And Eddie Redmayne would go on to win an Oscar for his portrayal of Stephen.
When stars are born and when they die, they emit UV radiation. So if we could see the night sky in the ultraviolet light, then almost all the stars would disappear, and all that we would see are these spectacular births and deaths.
The second that I was cast, I started researching him, and what I find extraordinary is his face is perhaps the most charismatic face I've ever seen. It's like all of the facilities that we have of gesture, of tone of voice, of all of those energies are channeled into those few muscles that he's able to use.
Blink to choose the colour of the group of the letter you want, Stephen. Green. Blue. Pink. Red.
A huge influence on Eddie's portrayal was advice he had from 2 of Stephen's children.
The great inroad to that was meeting Lucy and Tim. And I've spent a long time going to a motor neuron disease clinic and really trying to educate myself on the disease, and met many people who were suffering from it and wanted to be absolutely authentic to the disease, but I was being quite respectful. And then Tim said, yeah, but we did used to get into Dad's wheelchair and use it as a go-kart. Or we did used to put swear words into the voice machine and press play, you know. That was just such a revelation for me, because that was like, of course, it's just a normal family doing, you know, dealing with pretty extreme circumstances, but with humour and with fun.
Exactly, wind back the clock.
Wind back the clock.
Is that what you're doing?
Stephen's first wife, Jane, is played in the film by Felicity Jones.
Okay, winding.
She was touched by just how unusual their life together was.
Winding.
I started to see Jane was someone who when she met Stephen, she never patronised him, and I, in some ways, I subconsciously absorbed that. And then every time in the preparation of the film, I'd find new things and contradictions in this couple who both lived extraordinary lives.
There. That's better, isn't it?
Yes.
Did Stephen flirt with you?
Oh, I mean, he loves the ladies. So he was watching a scene we were doing, and then he wrote and asked if I would give him a kiss after we'd finished shooting, and I was like, of course, you're an icon. As, you know, he's...
I don't think even an icon is allowed just write and
Can I?
demand a
No,
kiss. Yeah.
only Stephen Hawking could get away with that.
But how accurate are these Hollywood biopics anyway? Only those who lived through it, Stephen's family, can really tell you. Stephen and his first wife Jane had 3 children. The eldest, Robert, here on the left, lives in Washington State in America. But Lucy, with her son, and Tim live here in Britain. So I'm heading to a school in London to meet Lucy. She's a writer now, and some of her dad's passions must have rubbed off on her, because she and he have co-authored together a series of children's science novels.
So many things are possible, but you have to imagine them first. Can you imagine a future that no one else has known of?
Today, Lucy is trying to get these primary school kids excited about the mysteries of the cosmos.
And so we have a mystery spaceship in orbit around the Earth. Sometimes this spaceship is invisible, and no one knows who it belongs to.
I am about to complete my 5th book written with him, which actually makes me his most prolific co-author. No one else has written 5 books with him. So that's my little record-holding title myself.
Is he a helpful co-author?
We're aiming for a kind of scientific accuracy and authenticity. And that's really, he plays a very important role in ensuring that I'm not allowed to break the laws of physics by going off on some crazy plot twist. And yeah, so that's annoying. Annoyingly persistent in his editing comments.
How has being Stephen Hawking's daughter affected your life?
Most people don't find their childhoods featuring in Oscar-winning Hollywood films. It just sort of underlines the point that really there was nothing normal about that. So it's hard to sum it up. I did read something that an astronaut said about what's it like to be in space. And I felt a lot of resonance with his quote. He said, being in space is a strange mixture of the really prosaic, like the everyday, and the deeply extraordinary, being in space. And that's kind of how I feel. That's what our lives with Dad are like. They're that strange mix of incredibly ordinary, but deeply extraordinary at the same time.
How strange is it watching the film of all of your lives?
The first time I saw it with my brother, it was just the 2 of us when we watched it, and we saw it in a private room at the film production company, and I just bawled my heart out. It was so astonishing to me to go back in time in the way that it did, and to see things that were just, I mean, I saw my grandparents who have all died, and there they are on screen. I saw the house we used to live in. I saw our whole story playing out in front of my eyes, and I walked out just stunned. But the bit that really gets me is actually a bit that, funnily enough, other people don't seem to like. At the end of the film, my father, played by Eddie Redmayne, is giving a lecture, and he goes into a sort of reverie at one point, and he gets up and walks, and he picks up a pen off the floor and returns it to the young woman. Oh, I'm going to cry now. That bit slays me, because I've never seen my father walk, and I have this sort of dream in which I see him walking. And when I watched that, I wanted it to go on forever. I wanted that bit to last for around 44.5 years, because it was like seeing our father as he would have been without motor neuron disease. So that was the bit that really broke my heart.
Well, I asked, of the things that your condition has taken from you, what do you miss the most? You did say, when my children were young, I missed not being able to play with them physically.
That's sad.
Yeah. Did you miss it? You said, or did you?
Yeah, I did. And of course, I have a lot of friends now who have small children, and especially with my male friends, you know, I see them pick up a small child, and it kind of really reminds me that that was something my father couldn't do. And that I find quite poignant and quite painful, because that would have been really nice.
Stephen's children rarely give interviews, but I particularly wanted to speak to Tim. At 36, he's Stephen's youngest child and grew up at a different stage of his father's illness. Nonetheless, it must still have been unsettling to watch their story in a film.
How weird, by the way, how seeing your family life on screen?
It was a very, very emotional, a lot more emotional for me than I perhaps thought. And I think particularly because, not ever knowing my dad as an able-bodied person, to actually see him as a young man, I think for me that was perhaps sort of one of the really lovely things about the film.
Actually, you grew up with him when he's already lost his voice. Am I right in saying that?
Well, the thing for me was that for about the first 4 or 5 years of my life, my dad was able to speak with his natural voice.
If you want to know why my mama left, you want to find the safe.
But it was very, very difficult to understand what he was saying, and obviously for me as a sort of 3-year-old, I had no understanding of what he was saying. And so I didn't really actually have any communication with him for about the first 5 years of my life. And then it was only when he got the speech synthesizer that I was actually able to start having a conversation with him, So it was kind of ironic in a way that him losing his voice was actually the start of him and I being able to form a relationship, really.
He did say the one thing which had effect is he didn't get a chance to physically play with his children. He said that was a regret. Did you feel that lack, or?
I think he helped wherever he could. He played board games, and he wasn't the easiest opponent, particularly chess.
Surely he let you win.
Well, no, there's no compassion there at all. He was
a point in parenting.
Hugely competitive.
Is there any one lesson you took from your father?
Well, I think I remember as a 12-year-old sort of asking him, a question which I think at the time I thought was a bit silly. Are there lots of other tiny little universes sort of dotted around? And then he gave me the answer, and then he said, don't ever be afraid to come up with an idea or a hypothesis, no matter how daft it may seem, just have the confidence to follow it through. And I think that's been a great lesson for me.
Another way in which Stephen Hawking inspires is in his sheer work ethic. Even at 73, even after 50 years of motor neuron disease, if he's not working on new science or attending a conference or writing another book, he's got a full schedule of work and social events to go to. Today, Stephen is at the Science Museum, where he's hosting a tour for a competition winner. This constant flurry of activity couldn't happen without the help of his technical assistant, Jonathan Wood. He's at Stephen's side to make sure things run smoothly.
You are led down the stairs, down the ramp, to meet the day's Earth. I handle all of Stephen's technical things, like I prepare his slides, I look after his computer, I book his holidays, I look after his car, anything that, obviously Stephen can't do because he's in a wheelchair, I help him to do.
It's very obvious, you can tell that there's communication that he can make with you that I don't see.
Yeah, to people sort of closest to Stephen, he's very expressive with his facial gestures. Just if he looks at me, I'll know whether he wants me to stay away or whether he wants some attention.
Because the chair he's in is, to a certain extent, a life support machine. Then.
Right. He's got a respirator on the back of his chair that regulates his breathing, and a humidifier that helps humidify the air going to him.
And has the computer ever broken? Has the battery ever gone flat?
Well, yeah, we run out of, forget the battery, or it hasn't been charged up overnight, and we sort of get somewhere. And the problem is that the battery powers not just Stephen's chair, but his computer and his speech. So we end up being somewhere, and suddenly Stephen will kind of go, it's not turned off.
And you can just run out of power.
Yeah, run out of power. It has happened, and we just have to push him back to the nearest power supply. Rarely, but on occasion.
It is a great honor for me to welcome London's official guest of honor to the Science Museum, the home of human ingenuity.
Adeze Oyanwa is a very lucky American school teacher. She won a prize to get the greatest VIP tour of London.
This is Apollo 10, which launched in May 1969 as a dress rehearsal for the Apollo 11 moon landing.
Getting a personal tour of the Science Museum from Stephen Hawking might have been a bit overwhelming for Adeze, but it's just one of the many talks and personal appearances that Stephen does every year around the world. But how do you take Stephen Hawking around the world? One woman who's done just that was his personal assistant for 10 years, Judith Crusdell.
Judith, how are you?
Hello, nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
She retired in 2014, but still lives in Cambridge with her parrot and the mementos of her travels.
I've travelled with him abroad to some very interesting places. I've been to China with him. I've been to Hong Kong, Israel and Chile. Perhaps the most extraordinary place to travel with Stephen was Easter Island. And Easter Island, I don't think it ever had a disabled person visit it because, you know, it's all gravel around the Moai and all the sites. Yeah. But relentlessly, Stephen went out and saw all the Moai, and it was wonderful travelling somewhere like that with him. You know, there wasn't anywhere that he couldn't go. And I stopped thinking about him as being disabled as well, because you think, God, he's a lucky fellow. Look at all the amazing places he's seen. And Stephen met Nelson Mandela. I remember asking Stephen about this afterwards. So what was it like, Stephen? So he said, well, at first I thought he was gaga. He was just staring at me. And I said, well, it didn't occur to you that he may have thought, what on earth is this? How am I supposed to talk to this man? So I said, I'm sure it was, they probably both looked at each other as if they were from another planet. And then there was a lot of bleeping and squeaking and stuff. And then suddenly this voice booms out. How nice it was to meet the great Nelson Mandela. And I imagine, you know, oh, he does speak.
Myself and Stephen share one achievement in common. We've both done the 0G flight.
Oh, you've done it?
I did it as well, actually, yes.
When Stephen went up, he did 8 fantastic parabolas, and he adored it. It was the most wonderful thing. I mean, just being up in the air, free of his wheelchair, he'll never get over it.
It was amazing. I could have gone on and on.
Does he take on too much?
Yes, he does on occasions. And when that happens, usually his body gives up, not him. He's ferociously. But then when he gets an infection or something, that's it. He has to stop. Dragged into hospital, bored to death. And I always remember his colleagues, grey-haired, venerable professors, saying things like, well, he'll cheer up if we go and see him. We'll just burble science over him and he'll just breathe that in, and that's how he'll get better. And they were quite right, actually. They knew him very well.
Oh, right.
And that's exactly what Stephen enjoyed most of all, I think.
So it's science that keeps Stephen chipper. And like Einstein before him, he uses pure mathematics and theoretical physics to come up with his theories about the universe. As a student, I studied both of these subjects, so I'm very excited because he's invited me over to talk about them.
Now, I'm not going to turn down the opportunity to talk science with one of the greatest minds of our generation. So I've come to Stephen's office here in Cambridge University. Not the Cambridge University you're probably used to seeing from all the films, or indeed Theory of Everything, not the one with all the stone cloisters. This is the ultra-modern Centre for Mathematical Sciences. Of course, they haven't ditched their history entirely. One of the buildings is named after an old boy from here, Isaac Newton.
Stephen has worked in this office for 15 years, and decorating the walls are pictures and mementos of his heroes and the people he's met. Like Barack Obama, Steven Spielberg, the theoretical physicist Richard Feynman, and of course, Albert Einstein. But what I'm excited by is what's on Stephen's blackboard.
This is in a nutshell, if I were to show one shot of why it's such a pleasure to spend time with Stephen Hawking. On the one hand, you have stills of his appearances in The Simpsons. And on the other hand, just below it, Hawking radiation, which he discovered.
Stephen's revolutionary breakthrough was discovering that despite their massive gravity, black holes send out radiation until there's nothing left. One person with an insight into how Stephen's unique mind comes up with these ideas is his friend and colleague Kip Thorne. Kip has worked with Stephen since the early 70s.
Although he could no longer draw diagrams on the blackboard, he learned to create shapes, geometries, topologies in his head. Some of his greatest breakthroughs in science, his discovery of Hawking radiation, for example, that black holes can only grow, they can't shrink. They came from manipulating shapes in his head in ways that I can't do and nobody else can do. He has shown to his colleagues and to the world that physical impairment does not have to prevent one from living life to the full and having a huge intellectual impact on the world. He is an inspiration to his colleagues. He's inspiration to the general public for what he has achieved. He's inspiration to me, particularly, for his stubbornness. He's the most stubborn man I've ever met by a very large margin. And that's a large part of what makes him succeed. And I try to emulate him. You simply don't give up. And if you don't give up and you work hard enough, you have a good chance of having some real big impact.
And there's no sign of him giving up. Even at 73, Stephen is still working on new theories of physics. And he's collaborating today with one of his former students, fellow physicist Professor Thomas Hertog, who has flown over from Belgium specially to work with him.
He can think, right? He can think very hard, he can think very well, he has a very clear scientific vision. So he feels cosmology is a mission he can fulfill despite his disability, and therefore that's what makes life worthwhile.
It is usually thought the Xe surface is very irregular, but we think the...
What makes him remarkable as a scientist is the clarity of his vision. He has an ability to see through all the clutter and to focus on the core problems, and also to abandon old ideas which stand in the way of further progress.
And even in the rarefied atmosphere of the Cambridge Maths department, most of the best work is done in the canteen. And now I'm excited, because when I studied theoretical physics, neither I nor any of my professors ever thought I'd be sitting down and talking physics with one of the greatest scientific minds on the planet.
In physics at the moment, there are these two huge theories. We have Einstein's theory of relativity, which talks about the very big planets and galaxies and gravity and how gravity affects them. And then we've got quantum mechanics, which deals with the very small and the tiny subatomic particles and the forces that work for them. The holy grail has for some time has been, how can we draw these two together? It's what people refer to as the theory of everything. And do you think we'll ever achieve that?
I think we will eventually discover a unified theory, though it may well take longer than the 20 years I predicted 45 years ago.
Your work is at the very edge of what is theoretical and what we're imagining. Does it disappoint you that we might not have an experimental proof of your work in your lifetime?
I am resigned to the fact that I won't see proof of Hawking radiation directly. I am now studying whether one might detect Hawking radiation in primordial gravitational waves. So I might get a Nobel Prize after all.
That's great. That is a direct pitch to win a Nobel Prize. I like the chutzpah of it. I like the nerve. One final question. In 1992, you postulated the, let me get the name of this correct, the chronology protection conjecture, which basically states that we can't travel backwards in time, thus destroying the Terminator movies. So thanks for that.
But even allowing you that, do you think there's any, and if you excuse the pun, future for time travel? Will we be able to use black holes, for example, to travel through time?
If you jump in a black hole, you will meet an unpleasant fate. It will be little consolation that your mass energy will be recycled as Hawking radiation.
That's tough news for a lot of dreamers, that one, but they have to hear it. This is something I had to bring along today, Stephen. This is my copy of A Brief History of Time, which was a Christmas present I got because I requested it when I was 16. This is an enormously important item in my life because it's managed to go through every house move I've made, you know, to the age of 43, this book. Is it possible to get you to sign this?
Yes.
Stephen signs books by leaving a thumbprint on them, which means that I am now a very proud little science nerd. What I'd love to do, obviously, is show it to 16-year-old Dara. I think it would actually mean a lot to him to see this book signed by one of his heroes. But unfortunately I can't, because thanks to him I can't go back in time. That's one of your great theories. So I'm stuck here. He'll never know. He'll never know, 16-year-old Dara, that this happened thanks to your chronology conjecture. Lovely. Thanks. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks. This science icon, one of the most unlikely of celebrities, is in demand all over the world, and he relishes the attention.
Please give an astronomical welcome to Felicity Jones and Professor Stephen Hawking.
He enjoys a round of applause, particularly if it's directed at him, and the opportunity to express his sense of humour.
I am particularly pleased to be presenting this award with the only person on the planet more intelligent than Stephen Fry.
Yes, and better looking.
And that mischievous sense of humour is about to be put to use again, and all for a good cause.
We're here in Cambridge again, but not for academic purposes. He knows his own iconography, but he's very happy to have that used for comic effect. In the last year, he's done Monty Python, he's done The Simpsons previously. We're here today where they're filming for comic relief for a sketch that appeared on the last Red Nose Day. Because he knows there's something inherently funny about this, and his impish sense of humour comes through.
So we just need to call it. I think it's just...
David Williams is resurrecting his character Andy from Little Britain, and Catherine Tate is playing an Irish nun.
Astounding to think the Lord created all this in just 7 days.
Incorrect. It took 13.8 billion years.
Well, let's not get bogged down in all that again.
The universe was created by a Big Bang.
I don't think so.
And after an initial expansion, the universe cooled.
You can go on like this all day.
Cut, thank you.
Stephen has the starring role of one of this year's headline sketches for Comic Relief. It's such a big deal, in fact, that even the co-founder of Comic Relief, Richard Curtis, has come along.
We hope that we're making a hilarious, very funny, brilliant sketch, but I think what it will mean is that if 2 million extra people watch the show, well, that really will mean that something like £4 million extra will get made.
And if you're very good, Stevie, you can watch Peppa Pig.
Don't like it.
I thought you loved Peppa Pig. You always said it was an astute critique of contemporary family life in porcine form.
Yeah, I know.
Well, then we'll watch Peppa Pig then.
Piss off.
What do you mean, piss off?
Ducking autocorrect.
Any more bad language like that, Stevie, and I'll wash your computer out with soap and water.
Thank you. Cut.
For both of you, the first time you've worked with Professor Stephen Hawking?
Certainly is.
Yeah, how have you found it?
He was very warm, he's been really funny, and very engaged with it all, and very happy
and he's
to be
got an
here.
amazing presence and a very beautiful quality.
Yeah, he's got a real twinkle,
Yeah, he has, yeah.
Plus, you can now join a list which The Simpsons, Monty Python, John Oliver. He does a lot of comedy.
Yeah, I think he genuinely loves it.
Waiting to tick off the list,
Yeah,
wasn't it,
I
to
mean,
be
you
fair?
start with The Simpsons, you build up.
Yeah, until you get off.
After 2 hours of filming in bitterly cold winter weather, Stephen's scenes are complete.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor. It's just been magical working with you.
As Stephen ages, though, his motor neuron disease continues to take more muscle movement from him. His greatest fear is that he loses the ability to control his computer. If that happens, he won't be able to speak, and then he wouldn't be able to do the things that are so important to him. So, his technical assistant Jonathan and computer specialists are trying to come up with even more ingenious ways of keeping him communicating.
So right now, the blink sensor is only able to detect this one movement. So what we're trying to do here is use a camera to detect the different gesture that he makes with his face. We know he can make 3 different gestures. So what we're really hoping to do with this is be able to reliably detect these 3 gestures. And then we're able to really improve his interface and make it much faster.
If all goes to plan, we'll continue to hear Stephen's voice for many years to come. The end of my time with Stephen is drawing near. After all the rushing about, it's quite nice just to relax in his kitchen, reading the newspapers with him.
You have, as far as I believe, done submarines, 0G.
Stephen has dedicated his life to science, and he's very proud of his achievements. Before I leave Cambridge, he wants to show off about one of them.
Over here is my fundamental physics prize, which I won in 2013. More valuable than a Nobel Prize.
Yes, the Fundamental Physics Prize is one of the biggest awards in science, bringing Stephen yet more acclaim for his life's work, and the small matter of $3 million of prize money. But there's no end to his ambition. Now he wants to conquer my world.
Dara, I have a joke for you. A photon checks into a hotel. The receptionist asks, "Can I help with your luggage?" The photon replies, "No, it's okay. I'm traveling light."
Yay! That's a top quality nerd joke. Thank you very, very much. That's excellent. Thank you very much.
What is a black hole?
I don't know. What is a black hole?
Something you get in a black sock.
Is that pattern? Can I take that? You know? Okay, 20-80 split. 20-80 split on that joke.
80-20. Done.
I got A Brief History of Time as a Christmas present when I was 16. And when you're 16, you choose your heroes based on triumph or disaster, and you don't want to meet them in case their humanity diminishes it. Then you get a little older and you do meet your heroes, and you realize that what makes them great is that humanity. It's meeting Stephen Hawking and seeing him as impish and geeky and flirty or curious or stubborn or warm. Just an ordinary dad and granddad who happens to have triumph and disaster in his life and to have risen above it. And the greatest achievement he has is his humanity and his normality, and that makes him even more of a hero.
That is a wrap.